Hi guys! One of the main problems in the fight against corruption in Russia is that almost everyone manages to leave the country with money. But there are simply rich people who receive their income in Russia in different ways, but then prefer to live in England. Moreover, it is England that is considered the most secure place from where they are not extradited for any legal claims. But the British are not stupid either. Today I will tell you how the oligarchs who escaped from Russia are outcasts in England. Elena Baturina is the wife of ex-Moscow mayor Yuri Lushkov. Lushkov had long since died, and Elena Baturina found herself in London as a persona non grata. According to media reports, the president of Inteca Management Corporation, who was considered the richest woman in Russia, was not accepted into the British elite. A few years ago, she was simply fired from her post as a member of the board of the Mayor's Foundation for London charity, an elite circle of icons. British establishment personalities led by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Aman Khan. As you know, Baturina was intellectually able to get into this circle of the elite thanks to one-time act of charity in the form of a check of 138,000. But despite the well-known expression that money does not smell, it turned out that in the harsh capital reality, the unpleasant smell of Dublin's capital can still become a good reason for exclusion from high society. What now? On her almost sad experience, a previously successful businesswoman will experience it. Baturina's fortune before Lushkov's resignation due to the loss of confidence was estimated by Forbes magazine at $3 billion. But a short time after the resignation is decreased to $1 billion. The sale of lands and other assets began. Parts of the Baturina empire, which was falling apart before our eyes. At the same time, criminal cases began to mature. Baturina chose to retire first to Austria and then to London. In Europe, she got involved in many projects, began to promote green energy in the Balkan countries, built a chain of hotels in Morocco, but her competitors banally threw her. In a word, without her husband, the mayor, her business did not go, and after the high society of London, the ex-queen of Moscow was also asked to go out. A sad result, but she is unlikely to have to dry crackers on the windowsill of her villa. However, more than one Miss Baturina from among the Russian oligarchs found herself abroad in the position of an outcast in a decent society. The clouds began to gather even over Roman Abramovich, who with his capital is considered the richest man in Britain. Back in 2019, The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph reported that in order to obtain a new British visa, it may be necessary to explain the origin of his fortune. At that time, oligarch was living in London on the basis of the so-called investor visa, which is issued to wealthy people, those who have invested more than £2 million into the British economy, which allows them to enter the United Kingdom for 40 months. Under the new rules, the government may refuse to issue a visa if they believe that the applicant does not really manage his own wealth, earn it illegally, or his investment will not contribute in the public good. According to media reports, investor visas were issued to about 700 Russians. But after the introduction of new rules, the number of visas issued decreased to 84%. We are currently taking a fresh look at how this way of obtaining visa works and the undertaking new investor due diligence, the government told The Guardian. As a result, in 2018, due to an expired visa, Abramovich could not ever enter the FA Cup final in which Chelsea beat Manchester United. In the end, they did give Abramovich visa. But for many others, especially those who deal with the law in Russia, the situation became disastrous. Another story is how Abramovich tried to become a peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine in 2022. After all, he has sometimes to lose in Russia itself and from its isolation by the West and his own assets in Britain itself. As a result, he had to leave Chelsea. Next on my list is Evgeny Chichvarkin, who in Russia owns the largest cell phone chain, Euroset. A field after being suspected of selling illegal phones, now in London, he owns only a small wine store. The richest banker of the early 2000s, Sergei Pugachev, was also broke. If earlier his fortune exceeded $1 billion, now by his own admission it has decreased to less than 70 million. Business abroad did not work out for such a shocking billionaire as Polonsky either. As a result, he ended up in Cambodia in prison, was extradited to Russia and ended up behind bars in his homeland. People familiar with the history of British capitalism warn the fugitives that the British have a rich historical record of taking money from foreigners. In India, for example, they allowed, when it was a colony of England, to form a local elite that robbed its people. And when they joyfully rubbing their hands arrived with the stolen property in London, permanent residents, the brave British, within their framework of the law, promptly seized the stolen capital from them. Is the same fate being prepared today in British for those who fled Russia? This cannot be ruled out. I should ever say that they are definitely preparing it. From the latest example, apart from Abramovich, this is Oleg Tinkov, who himself says that after escaping from Russia in Britain, his bank account was arrested. A few years ago, the British media published the location and cost of apartments, houses and estates of Russian oligarchs in London. The Guardian newspaper insisted that all this property be confiscated in favor of the UK. It was also reported that British government is actively discussing a new bill that would involve the expropriation of the property of Russian oligarchs and official it has a corruption origin. According to the Guardian, now immigrants from Russia in London own property worth £1.1 billion. If the law is passed, it could be expropriated in favor of the state. It is also interesting that throughout history, not one Russian who fled or simply moved with capital to England before the revolution or much later has taken a high position in society there. In this regard, we must pay tribute to the British elite who don't include foreigners in their ranks, but live only in their own community, which, for example, cannot be said about the USA. But the USA is a completely different story. But being excluded from high society or being left without money are far from all the problems that those who have left Russia with money in the West have to face. Often they have to part not only with their former position in society and with the capital occupied by illegal labor, but also with their lives. The most famous example of this kind is the sad fate of Boris Berezovsky, who in March 2013 was found in his luxurious house in London with a noose around his neck. At first he talked about suicide, but when there was a lot of evidence that the fugitive oligarch was killed and most likely the British intelligence services were behind this, Berezovsky's daughter cited strong evidence that the oligarch did not actually hang himself, but became a victim of murders. However, the ex-chief of security for the oligarch Sergei Sokolov has already announced the murder of Berezovsky. According to the English newspaper Daily Mail, he believes that CAR and the British intelligence service MI6 were involved in the death of Boris Berezovsky. And such a sad fate befell more than one fugitives from Russia. In England, Berezovsky's inseparable friend Bardi Pataradzikishvili suddenly passed away. The entrepreneur died of the heart attack. In November 2012, Alexander Perepelitsyn, the chief informant of the Swiss fund Hermitage Capital of the international adventure William Brody, went for daily run near his home in Surrey, and soon he was found dead. The examination at first did not reveal any suspicions and admitted that the death was due to cardiac arrest. However, 3 years later, during a second autopsy, pathologists found the remains of the poisonous plant gelsomia in his stomach. About the mysterious death of the ex-FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko, associated with Berezovsky, poisoned in London with polonium, they also wrote a lot. But a month after Litvinenko, another fugitive Russian from Berezovsky's circle, Yuri Golubev, founder of the Yukos oil company, died. One of the cases of death is a heart attack. Such a mournful list of deaths of the ex-Russian oligarchs in foggy Albion can be continued for a long time. Well, what can you say? They themselves choose their fate. Unfortunately, is one who, for one reason or another, leaves his homeland, even those who try to find happiness there, hoping in vain that suitcases of stolen dollars will give him it. But even they can be pitied, because they have lost the most precious thing in the life of every person. The great Russian philosopher Ivan Ilyin said about such people, "People without a motherland became historical dust, faded autumn foliage, driven from place to place and trampled into the mud by strangers." So guys, if you like this video, like it, subscribe to my channel. See you soon. Bye bye.